what I like to add on to that and make sure people really do understand is they have to get enough protein. I recommend people take their body weight in pounds and multiply it by 0.6. That's the number of grams they should get per day minimum of protein. And then about 10% more than that is what I recommend they shoot for. I already mentioned there are 180 to 200 proteins in bone.
Living with autoimmunity doesn't mean settling for less. Inspired Living with Autoimmunity is the show for high achievers who want the energy and vitality to live fully, not just manage symptoms. With your host and autoimmune coach, Julie Houghton. It's time to take your power back.
Dr. Neustadt, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Please call me John.
I will, but I like to just throw that out there in the beginning. Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to have you back. And for listeners that missed our first interview, they really need to go check it out. And that was episode number 128, because I thought that was jammed with things people needed to understand about bone health. And now you've gone and learned more and updated your book, and you're sharing more, which is so exciting. So give us a little snippet of, how did you become one of the most well-known bone health experts?
Well, first, you're right. The second edition of my book, Fracture Proof Your Bones, expanded and updated edition, is now out.
Yay!
And I never writing a first edition on, let alone a second edition. So where I'm at in my career, in my life is, I think, as much a surprise to me as anyone, because 20 years ago when I was starting out in my career, I didn't see myself as specializing in bone health and osteoporosis, but fate and opportunities, have a way of presenting themselves and directing us, I think, where we should be going in our life. And this was definitely something that found me, patients who had bone loss and osteoporosis, and their bone density was going up. So I was happy because I was doing what I was trained. I was monitoring what I was trained to monitor. My mother-in-law at the time had osteoporosis, and she was on Fosamax. I was helping her with some integrative, medicine recommendations, diet, lifestyle, supplements, exercise. But she was also on Fosamax, and her bone density was going up. So her physician was happy, she was happy, and I was happy. And then she tripped on a rug in her house and broke her hip. And I thought something's wrong with this picture, because by that objective measure, that number on the test, we all assumed she should have been protected. So I dove into the research, and what I found was absolutely shocking. That a bone density test only predicts 44% of women with osteoporosis who will fracture, 21% of men. That's not old. At that time, that a bone density test fracture. Every medical association that's looked at this data has correctly concluded that fracture risk depends on factors largely other than bone density. But despite that, and even today, 20 years later, the conversation with doctors and patients in the office is almost exclusively centered on just that number on the test. And so I continued to learn, continue to strive to really understand and tease apart the research and be able to present it in ways that can inform these conversations with their doctors, give them questions to ask, but also provide a guidebook that allows people to create holistic bone health programs for themselves, focused not on the number on the test, but how can they reduce their fracture risk?
Yeah. Well, because that's the key. Who cares what your number on the test is? It's about, having strong bones that aren't going. I don't know. It could be because I am a little bit of I fall down a lot, not a lot, like in a medically concerning way. I'm just not always as careful as I should be. And so, our bones are supposed to be able to take a little bit of a hit. I do laugh as an equestrian that the ground is definitely harder than it was when I was a kid. But if you're standing on the ground and you fall down without great force or trauma, we want our bones to just help us get right back up.
And I think there are two big concepts here that are important to understand this issue. One is that bone density test. And I do believe it is important. It does have some predictive value. It shouldn't just be tossed in the trash. I do recommend people get them. I recommend they get follow-up tests. It's one thing to monitor, but it's limited in its ability to predict fractures. Then, in fact, that only measures the quantity of bone, how much minerals you have in bone. But bone is a tissue, like all tissues in our body. It's made up of different things, not just minerals. There is another really important piece to bones that is ignored, and that is the non-mineral component, the proteins in bone, the collagen in bone. That's what gives bone its ultimate strength. There are 180 to 200 different proteins in bone, including collagen. And collagen, strand for strand, is stronger than steel. When
Wow.
collagen is healthy, it's also flexible. And so that's why when we're younger and we have healthier collagen and we fall, the ground doesn't feel as hard necessarily because the bone can absorb that impact over a greater volume of bone, and that bone actually can deform a little bit, can accept that impact without being brittle. And as we get older, if the collagen is degrading, if the bone quality is degrading, the bone minerals are also degrading. That's when you.
Yeah, this is why we're having the conversation. And I'm really excited because one of the things that I hope we're going to talk about is the importance of gut health and bone health. And interestingly enough, it was a kind of an anecdotal aside in our last conversation that directly relates to that topic, which was that my oldest son, when he was in probably middle school, was osteopenic. He was an undiagnosed celiac, and we didn't know yet. And we chatted a little bit about that in the episode that we did a couple of years ago, but we didn't follow the thread, and now I know why it's even more important because I really want to dive into that. And I know some listeners are like, oh no, not gut health. Yep. You just can't take it out of any conversation about wellness.
No, you can't. And that is a new part to my book, in addition to the new expanded edition of the book, where I talk more about that gut over the last years has really become quite relevant and not controversial. There are direct and indirect in your intestines and your bones. And in fact, you mentioned celiac disease, obviously an intestinal issue with a problem, people consuming gluten-containing foods and the immune system becoming inflamed. And in some cases, it's actually been documented in the research that osteoporosis can be the only symptom of celiac disease.
Yeah, I could totally see it.
Right. And your experience shows that. And when it comes to gut health, people with irritable bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, people with malabsorption and chronic inflammation, they are at elevated risk for osteoporosis and fractures. And there are multiple mechanisms that explain that in terms of that gut-bone connection. The direct mechanism is that inflammatory chemicals called cytokines that help modulate inflammation, those that encourage inflammation, like IL-1, IL-6, and others. That's what they're called, interleukins.
Yep.
And others. If they get out of the gut, because 90% of the immune system is in the gut. And so when that becomes inflamed and those inflammatory molecules get released, they go into the blood flow circulation where they can eventually travel to the bone. And in the bone, they activate osteoclasts. There are two types of primarily, metabolically active cells in the bone. Osteoblasts help build up and make new bone, and osteoclasts break down old worn out bone in a in a process called bone remodeling, which we need. It's healthy, but when it's imbalanced and there's too much bone remodeling or there's too much breakdown, that's when you lose bone density. That's when you get dangerously low in terms of your bone health and increased risk for fractures. And those inflammatory molecules activate the osteoclast, so they break down bone faster. That's a direct mechanism. Then indirectly, what happens is you can get these, with malabsorption, you can get nutritional deficiencies that are well documented with these diseases. And that also then contributes to the bone loss. And then you layer onto that the medications that are prescribed for many of these conditions. And one of the most common ones that I see are the antidepressants. So those are anything that elevates serotonin, Lexapro, Prozac, this selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They activate osteoclasts as well. There are serotonin receptors on bone. And so you get additional bone breakdown. And in fact, the research has shown that for every 19 women taking an SSRI medication for 1 to 5 years, we now expect one of them to break a bone. And most doctors are unfortunately unaware of the bone damaging side effects of not just that medication, but most medications. Another commonly prescribed one is prednisone, glucocorticoids, anti-inflammatories, powerfully anti-inflammatories. 2% of the general population is on glucocorticoids. Wow. And when it comes to bone health and osteoporosis, however, they destroy collagen, they reduce bone mineral density, they actually damage also bone muscle tissue, so people can have less balance and less strength, which increases their risk for falls and fractures. And taking glucocorticoids long term, we expect about 50% of those people to fracture.
Wow.
So it's a very dangerous situation.
It is, especially when the only tool being used is prescription medication. So, and we had talked also last time about proton pump inhibitors, as being another. It just these stacks, and you take, especially, our audience, if they're still, pretty much in that traditional rheumatology route, well, then you better believe there's steroid use. You better, probably the majority are on some kind of SSRI or antidepressant. They just stack these. I had said in our last conversation, I was on that PPI for side effects from the other prescriptions I was on that were supposed to be treating the RA. It becomes this snowball.
And if you look at just in general, the category of autoimmune diseases and the risk for fractures, if you look at the different autoimmune diseases, the increase in fracture risk is 200 to about 400%.
Wow. Well, and for two different reasons now it's not just the medications, but that direct connect. I know anybody, I shouldn't say I know, I believe, and it has been my experience, that anybody, with autoimmune or any kind of really chronically inflamed, chronic inflammatory systemic inflammation has leaky gut. If they haven't already done intentional things to heal that, it's just part of the story, period. And so this explanation that you're giving us about the cytokines getting out and is like, it to me, I was like, oh, well, we just started talking, but that's a mic drop right there. Because it's like, oh my gosh, so we're, those with autoimmune, multiple autoimmune, then you're kind of getting it from both sides if you're taking some of those medications. And we're not telling anybody not to take your medications. That's not, it's ask the questions and learn.
No, but what I do recommend patients do is they have a medication review with their physician and with their pharmacist, because many doctors are unaware of the bone damaging side effects. Prednisone is well known. That's not anything. Everybody, all the doctors know about that. But the other ones, not so much. And
Yeah.
in fact, there was a study that was done that looked at the medications that patients were taking in the 3 months before they were hospitalized for a hip fracture, and then what medications they were taking after they left. In the 3 months prior to ending up in the hospital with a fracture, 75% of them approximately were taking a medication that either reduced their bone density, caused osteoporosis. Left, there was no improvement in that. Where people were switched maybe off a dangerous medicine, they were switched onto a different medicine that also was dangerous for a different reason.
Right.
And so that's where patients really need to become educated. There's a whole chapter in my book, expanded in the second edition, on medication-induced bone loss, questions to ask your doctor, because this is a real blind spot for conventional medicine that patients need to advocate for themselves. So if they can decrease the dose or switch to a safer medication or work with an integrative provider, naturopathic doctor, functional medicine doctor, where they're able to actually discontinue it, if they're
Right.
able to do that, even better.
I love that. Since we're talking about gut right now, are there foods that we should either avoid or reduce consumption of as it relates to bone health?
Absolutely. And I would just say this, it's really about somebody's overall dietary pattern. I get the question a lot, should I avoid, food X or food Y? I'm concerned about this specific food. And my response is, it's about the overall dietary pattern, not one specific food. If there's a category of foods that people should minimize, it's ultra processed.
That's not food.
It's not food, and I love that you said that. And I always, when I talk about ultra processed foods, I said it's definitely a misnomer.
Yeah.
They're chemically manufactured environmental toxins that people are consuming.
Yeah.
And these are, there's no ambiguity now in the research, where the more the body consumes this, the greater their risk for Alzheimer's disease, dementia, cancer, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, etc. And yes, research osteoporosis as well. In my reading of the research, the cutoff seems to be more than where you start to get some of these dangerous associations is if more than 10% of your calories are from ultra processed foods. Ultra processed foods are packaged foods, they're convenience foods, they go in the microwave, they go in your backpack or your purse, and they're quick and easy and convenient. But they also, in too high amounts, are dangerous. Unfortunately, 60% of the calories in the American diet currently are from ultra-processed foods. And what I just said is that the research shows that above 10% is where you start seeing these real dangerous associations with chronic diseases and death. And so the American diet is really the exact opposite of what the research shows is helpful. And that dietary pattern that is helpful is the Mediterranean dietary pattern. And that's primarily a plant-forward diet, whole foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, lean proteins. And what I like to add on to that and make sure people really do understand is they have to get enough protein.
Yes.
And I recommend people take their body weight in pounds and multiply it by 0.6. That's the number of grams they should get per day minimum of
At
protein.
least.
And then about 10% more than that is what I recommend they shoot for. I already mentioned there are 180 to 200 proteins in bone. The USRDA for protein is insufficient as people age to maintain healthy bone and muscles. So people need to get more than that. And so that's where just focusing on what I have people focus on in my book, and I walk them through transitioning into eating this way for, to promote their health for the rest of their life, is just fiber and protein.
Yeah. Those are the things everybody's lacking in. And I mean, it actually takes intention to eat enough protein. It really does.
So what's interesting is you're right. So I think that's absolutely correct. And I think that there is a threshold, though, above which it's much harder and it's a more stressful, for me at least. So I did my own experiment.
Of course you did.
The number of grams minimum of protein I should be getting a day, which is about 90. And then that's with the calculation I just mentioned, 0.6 grams of protein per pound body weight per day. Then I increased it to what I see on the internet, and people keep saying people should do, and that's 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So that's a huge difference. 90 grams to 100 and about 50 grams.
Yeah.
Right? Huge difference. So what I found when I got up higher than what I recommend, maybe up to that 1 gram per day, I didn't have any room left in my stomach or any
Fiber.
hunger left to eat the vegetables that are giving me the vitamins and the minerals and the other plant nutrients that my body needs to thrive and that contain the fiber that we need for a healthy microbiome and to help modulate our blood sugar and all of those beneficial things that come from eating plants.
Yes.
And also the research just doesn't support it. There are 0 studies on that high a dose of protein.
Yeah. And it's really it's not sustainable anyway. It's very difficult to do if you're eating real food.
Correct. And most people are eating, we're creatures of habit.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it takes less energy, habits we don't have to think about. And where people are primarily just eating day to day, just like, out of habit. And so part of it is transitioning into eating healthier over a period of time that makes it sustainable, where we're developing a new habit, where frankly, it becomes easy to eat this way. Like for me, I don't even think about it. It's just part of my life.
It's just how you eat. It really is. I don't know. I do want to highlight also, in addition to the fact that it's ultra processed food is not food, and you already, it's been chemically manipulated. For people to really consider, because 10% of your calories is not a tenth of what you're eating.
Good point.
Because those ultra processed foods tend to be, really lacking in nutrients and really calorie dense. So if you're listening and you still have ultra processed foods in your diet, just really consider the fact that they're really usually pretty high in calories, and so it may be even less than you think that puts you below that danger threshold.
So people can do a quick and easy little experiment to sort of get that understanding. If you look at, maybe a recommendation is 2,000 calories per day. Just take that in general, 2,000 calories a day for an adult. So these ultra-processed foods, they're packaged foods. By law, they have to list the number of calories per serving that's on there. So just look at that. How many calories? You may realize that one
and how
bar,
little is a serving.
right, that one bar is 1 serving and is 200 calories. That's 10% right there.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm glad you picked easy math.
Well, and importantly, too, in terms of the gut health, there are 10,000 chemicals that are approved for use in food in the U.S. compared to 4,000 in the European Union.
Yes.
Most of those have never been studied for their toxicological effects in animals and potentially humans.
Sure.
But what the research shows, and some of them that have been studied, these emulsifiers and other chemicals added in animal studies, that they change the microbiome.
Yes.
They alter the microbiome when they're consumed. And additionally, the thing that also needs to highlight is just not the food or food and protein. It's also the packaging. A study was done showing that the packaging that these products come in, the packaging is leaching into the food. So we're consuming those as well. Those are plasticizers and other chemicals that are known hormone disruptors.
Right. And this is why I'm sitting here nodding, so this is why I love having you on the podcast.
Well, I love this. And for people with autoimmune diseases or any disease, you want to stack the deck in your favor.
Right.
Get these environmental toxins out as much as possible. I'm realistic. I don't expect people to go to 0 ultra-processed foods, but minimize it. Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing is, once you minimize it, you tend to find yourself at 0 or really close to 0, because you've just totally changed lifestyle at that point. I know there's so many things that I used to think I loved to eat 20 years ago that now I'm like, just the thought of it makes me sick. And it's because I know what's in it and I know what it does.
What's interesting in working with patients is our bodies adapt to the environment.
Yeah.
And so these drinks with artificial sweeteners in them, or these sweetened packaged foods, are sweeter than natural fruits and vegetables. And so that's what the body becomes habituated to and believes is normal. And so the people's experiences are frequently that then when they eat an apple, it doesn't taste as sweet. It's not registering as really sweet and tasty because that's not what they're used to. So again, transitioning into this way of eating over time is important because as you reduce those, the taste buds will change.
They do.
They will change. And what wasn't sweet, what is naturally sweet, like apples and oranges, will taste sweeter.
Absolutely. I had a client who, this was several years ago, and it was really cute because she was a soda-aholic and a diet soda-aholic at the time, and had just been diagnosed with diabetes on top of her high blood pressure and all the things when I first met her. And as we were working together, she was in her 60s. It was a genuine question. She wasn't being a wise ass. She was like, have strawberries always been this sweet? You know, she was like, I used to put sugar on my strawberries. And I'm like, yep, they're supposed to be dessert. It's great. So our taste buds do change, and that is the fun. Just like our bone health can bounce back, and we're constantly rebuilding.
Absolutely. Our bodies, they respond to the environment. And when we give the environment, the internal and the external environment for our body to thrive, our health gets better. Our bone health gets better. We can increase bone density. We improve somebody's fracture risk. And when I mean external environment, I talked about some internal environment, the gut-bone connection, the foods we're eating. Externally, what I dive into in the book is the research on social networks and social connections, because it's very clear that people who have healthy social lives and close, not even a lot, even just a couple close friends, if they do fracture, they heal faster. And their risk for osteoporosis is lower. And one of those things that I hypothesize that I think might be happening there is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone in our bodies for, where we feel connected and that we experience love and connection. And our cells, just like there are serotonin receptors on bone, there are oxytocin receptors on bone as well.
That's
in fact,
amazing.
Our osteoblasts, the cells that build up fresh, new, healthy bone, they produce their own oxytocin. And research in animals show that when they're given oxytocin, their bone health improves. And women with osteoporosis, when they were tested, their oxytocin was lower than women without osteoporosis. So being connected, engaged, doing things to improve that oxytocin flow, whether it's getting a massage, even petting animals, that physical connection, all of that is
a 6-second hug.
Yeah, all of it. Yes. Yep.
So important. And that makes so much sense. And we know social connection is so essential for overall health and well-being and longevity anyway. But I love just the science of the bones. Like, who knew there was so much going on in there? That, it's just kind of like we used to think of the neurotransmitters, it was all about the brain. And of course it's the gut, and it makes sense that almost everything has beautiful redundancy or multi-purpose in the body. So why wouldn't the bones have these receptors too?
It is all interconnected. And look, bones as an organ is the largest organ by weight in our entire body. And they do more than just help us move and walk around, stand and hug our loved ones and play and enjoy life, carry our groceries in the house, all those things. They also produce our red blood cells and our white blood cells and our platelets. They produce hormones that are used throughout the body. So they're incredibly important. And in many ways, I've come to see them as that canary in the coal mine. that if your bones are getting weaker, if the bone density is going down, if the bone quality is decreasing, it really is an indication that your longevity and your health span are decreasing as well.
That right there, that's what listeners need to take away from this is ask why, right? It's a symptom, it's a signal. But it's not this separate standalone thing. It means there's something off, or like you said, whether it's medication driven or, something else is going on. And we did talk about the importance of hormones in the last episode that we did as well. I want to touch on, before I let you go, we talk about, bone density tests, are important, and they're a piece of information, a good thing to watch. What I know also in the book, you talk about there are labs we could be checking, right? That often aren't getting checked, that can indicate what's going on with our bone health.
That's correct. And I think that there are labs that are just routine labs that can be interpreted in a way that can give us a window into what might be happening and what risks there are without having to spend a lot of extra money. So just a regular complete blood count with a differential.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a red blood cell and then white blood cells with the differential that show the types of white blood cells that are there, the neutrophils, lymphocytes, macrophages. That neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is associated with elevated bone loss. So what that is, the white blood cells are immune cells. And when neutrophils are elevated, it means there's inflammation going on. Your immune system has been activated for some reason. It doesn't tell us why, but there's something going on. And when it's elevated, then that is associated with faster bone loss, osteoporosis, and osteopenia. The other thing is looking at a serum ferritin test. And that's not commonly run, but it is accessible. Conventional labs run it. It's not expensive. That is the most sensitive indicator for iron status. And that's going to go down faster than low iron will show up in the complete blood count as decreased hemoglobin, decreased red blood cells, decreased hematocrit. Those are all signs of iron deficiency anemia, but ferritin is the storage form of iron, and it's used throughout our body for hundreds of processes. And so when that serum ferritin starts to go down and gets too low, it is associated with osteoporosis. And so ensuring that you have enough iron is really important. And I go in my book about how to interpret those tests because the reference ranges from labs are so broad as to be clinically useless. So I really
they're
want
a bell curve. They are useless.
Well, but it's such, with the ferritin itself, I've seen the reference ranges as all the way from a low of 10 to over 200. Like that is so broad as to be clinically useless.
Right.
But what we see in the research is we really want it above 50 when it comes to symptoms like fatigue, because iron is used to produce cellular energy. Our bones need cellular energy. Every system in the body needs it.
Sure.
And so I typically actually like it around 60 or 70, okay. But I've seen it as low as 30 or 25 in patients, and their doctor who tested it didn't supplement them with iron, even though they're symptomatic, and because it's quote unquote normal. Right. So understanding those nuances that I educate people in my book can be helpful for driving your own healthcare and helping to ask the important questions that you need to ensure that you're getting the care that is best.
And I can say, like, as a clinic owner, the right providers, they want you to have questions. They want you to be your own advocate. It doesn't mean you don't trust your doctor. It means you're the expert on you. And as I think everybody should get the book and have these conversations with their providers. And if you happen to have a provider who is not interested in your conversation, find another provider.
Yeah, it's a service industry. If you're not getting the service you like, you're welcome to fire them and find somebody else. But I love that you mentioned the book and having conversations with doctors, because I can't tell you the number of times I've heard from patients where they take my book into their doctor's appointment, because in the book it gives questions to ask of the doctor, and there are take action sections at the end of different chapters where people can write down the answers to the questions to ensure they're getting the best information. And when the doctors have insisted that they start taking a medication right away, even if it was first diagnosed, then they have that book and they are able to go back and have a more informed discussion. And I've had doctors or patients report to me that their doctor, after seeing the book, after having the conversation, agreed. They backed off on pushing the medication so hard and saying, okay, let's just try what you're talking about for a year. They're more willing to go along and say, let's give it a shot for a year. And because we'll retest, we'll do another bone density
You're going to follow it. Yeah.
Or
And
the doctors who have even told me they have the book. Somebody comes in with osteoporosis, they prescribe the book. It is read this book. This is what we're going to implement.
I love that.
Tailor it to the person's specific needs to guide them through in a way that helps, stack the deck in their favor towards success.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up. That was one of the things we did discuss. And I obviously we can't share the whole book in a couple of conversations. But so really listeners, go back and listen to episode 128. But that is a big highlight there as well, of like, if there's one thing people can do, it's, if they get a diagnosis of osteoporosis and they are strongly offered a medication immediately, I believe, to quote you directly from our last conversation, you said, breathe. And again, gather your information, and there is time to make the right decision for yourself.
Well, and the medication may be important.
It might
but
be.
It's not educating it. So in terms of breathing, there's so much anxiety around a diagnosis of osteoporosis, and rightly so. It's scary.
Yeah.
And I have patients come to me and they have gotten a diagnosis, and they're so anxious that the first thing I do is I have them take a few breaths. Then I explain to them the limitations of the bone density test, just what I talked about before, how predictive it is and not as predictive as most people think. And I say that, look, this is important, but it's not an emergency. There is time to educate yourself and create a holistic bone health program that makes sense for you. And that may include medications, but it might not.
Yeah. And I think that it's very similar with an autoimmune diagnosis. They tend to still more often than not kind of make it this emergency, and you have to take these medications right now, or you're gonna breathe. Nobody can make a good decision in a sympathetic state. And like you just said, when we get a diagnosis, whether it's osteoporosis, autoimmune, fill in the blank. When you get a diagnosis, stress goes up.
Yep.
So don't make your decisions.
I'd like people a quick and easy. When they get their bone density test results, on most reports, toward the bottom of the fracture risk assessment, it gives you the probability of your fracture over the next 10 years. It's a calculation that's based on different inputs that include your bone density, but also includes your age and potentially other factors. So a lot of times that's either glossed over or it is emphasized in a way that is very negative, meaning, there's a 10% chance you're going to fracture in the next 10 years. Well, the opposite of that statement is also true.
Right.
There's a 90% chance, according to the test report, that you will not fracture in the next 10 years. So let's all just take a beat. Let's get the numbers and the information in its proper perspective so people can make better decisions.
I love that. And there is this tendency, especially in medicine, but just human nature too, to, like you said, we're going to focus on this 10% and we're not even going to discuss the fact that you have a, 90% chance you're not going to fracture. So I love the glass half, and it's just reality based. It is glass half full, but it's also remembering,
it's 90% full.
Yeah.
But also I want to you in terms of the limitation of the bone density test. And I discovered this in researching for the new book. And it's, I have a much expanded, a much larger chapter on exercise where I review the different clinical trials and studies on different programs that are out there and types of exercise. But in terms of looking at exercise and its effect on fracture risk, researchers, this is over 20 years ago, did a study where they compared bone density plus how strong and steady somebody was on their feet, the stability. What is their risk for falling? 95% of fractures occur because somebody falls.
Of course.
What they found was that if people were steady on their feet, that their risk of falling was low.
Yeah.
A bone density test and only predicted about 5% of men and women younger than 70 who would fracture. And it only went up to, I think, if I remember correctly, like 10 or 14% of people over 70 who will fracture. So that bone density test, again, looking at multiple variables simultaneously.
Right.
You really get a clearer picture of what somebody's risks are and what to do.
Yeah. And so important. And thank you for adding, because we can't talk about bone density and bone health without talking about exercise, at least touching on it. And again, I know you go into it in the book, and I do think I am getting one for the clinic now that I'm like, oh yeah, the clinic should have the book too. We all have bones, period. Like we all need to be really, optimizing. Again, so far I haven't heard you say anything crazy that's not just supportive of health.
Absolutely. Right? And if I may touch on one more testing thing that's really important.
Yes.
Because it doesn't involve a machine. Yeah. It doesn't involve a blood draw. It doesn't involve an x-ray. It is the one-legged stand test. That is something that anybody can do themselves. And I really emphasize this in the book. Tests, things that people can do themselves at home or clinicians can easily do. Literally, it takes 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Research showed that they did a study that looked at people 51 to 55 years old, and about 95% of them could stand on one leg for 10 seconds. By the time they were in their 70s, less than 50% of them could. Wow. Those who could not had an over 80% increase risk of dying. So that's that stability piece and strength piece. So that's one way. Also, people can can monitor themselves doing things to increase simple things, strength and stability. And I go through all of that with ideas, with recommendations throughout the book.
So amazing. Fracture proof your bones. I'm guessing now if people go to order the book, do they need to look for expanded second edition, or is that pretty much what they're going to get if they
So on my website, nbihealth.com, the Fracture Proof Your Bones expanded and updated edition is the only one that's there. On Amazon, the old book is still there. I think they still have a little bit of inventory, but
Gotcha.
Hoping it comes off there soon. But
okay.
Yes, it's the white cover. It's the one behind me here.
Yes.
The one that you showed. They look totally different. So make sure it's the larger book. It's over 400 pages, much bigger, and definitely.
Well, and it's I want to highlight again too. It's a guide. Within the book there's a lot of such valuable information on how do we do it? How do we do these things? It's not just 400 pages of you dumping information on people that you've learned over the years. No, I don't want them to be intimidated by that.
I think it's about 420 pages or something, and 100 of those, 90 of those are research citations.
Yeah.
And because I want people to know that they can go and look up any of this stuff, and so can their physicians. Right. Everything that I say is cited. It's all peer reviewed. It's in peer reviewed medical journals, and it's a practical guide of how to create holistic bone health programs.
It is.
For yourself or a loved one, or have conversations with your doctor, your healthcare provider, and how clinicians can use this information to improve the outcomes of their patients as well.
Yeah, which is the why they're in it to begin with. So so grateful and glad. I was kind of teasing you a little bit before we hit record that there aren't that many authors who go back and expand and revise and improve. We know how much work goes into writing books like this, and so I personally so grateful that you did, because it just gives an even broader picture of what's really going on with our bone health, and just it's all the same things that it parallels. Why is autoimmunity rampant? Why is it's all the same inputs. And so, so grateful. So last time I mentioned the breathe, and that was your one step that I asked for at the end of our conversation. So I'm going to ask you for a different one today, to come up with one step for us that we can do to support our health and our bone health.
Not to be self-promotional, but I really can't think of anything else that's better at this point. Get the book. Buy the book, read the book. It's going to arm you with the information and the facts that you need to make better decisions, because every 30 seconds, someone somewhere in the world is breaking a bone because of osteoporosis. A woman's risk of an osteoporosis fracture is equal to her combined risk of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. And if you are a woman with osteoporosis who fractures, there's up to a 36% chance that you're going to be dead within a year. Men also have a very high mortality. And if you have other diseases like breast cancer and you end up in the hospital with a fracture, there's an 83% increase chance that you're going to die compared to a woman with breast cancer who doesn't fracture.
Wow. And you're not saying that to drive people through fear, because we can change the trajectory and improve our bone health.
I actually am doing that a little bit to drive people for fear.
To take action, yes, but not in a doom and gloom sense.
This is the frustration for me. This is the reality of the disease. It is second only to cardiovascular disease as a global health issue. There is no, pink ribbon campaign or marathons for this. And yet people are suffering and struggling and dying. I did a quick calculation before I came on. I mentioned before, people on prednisone, about half of them, it's estimated, will fracture. 2% of the general population is on prednisone. 5% of postmenopausal osteoporosis patients are on chronic glucocorticoids. And there are an estimated 10 million people in the US, that's the official number, and I think it's woefully underestimated, with osteoporosis or at risk. If 80% of those are women, and this is just off the calculation with some assumption, we're talking tens of thousands of extra people dying every year unnecessarily.
Wow. Yeah. No, and I love your passion comes through for sure. And I do agree. Fear, it can be it's not fear, it's facts. Like it's data.
But the fact also is you can do something about this.
Right. And that's the gift.
Ways to reduce your risk.
Yeah.
I've gone through the research and I've tried as best as I can to communicate it in a simple way and create a system to walk people through chapter by chapter how to improve the odds, how to improve their bone health, not based on theory, but based on what the real measurable difference in bone density, in laboratory use, in fall risk, all within the book with the goal of preventing fractures and reducing somebody's risk.
Yeah. And I'm going to add, you can get the book on Amazon and that's easy, but I want to inspire listeners really to go to your website, go to mbihealth.com, because you also have other resources on the website too. So go to the website and check that out and get the book there. I think is even more advantageous. You have all kinds of articles and information that are, I could just spend the day on your website. So
Thank you.
John, I so appreciate the contribution, and keep singing it. We do need to get the word out there that the importance of bone health and the steps that people can take. So really, really grateful to have you back.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
For everyone listening, remember you can get the transcripts, links, and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. Go and get the book, Fracture Proof Your Bones, expanded 2nd edition, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Inspired Living with Autoimmunity, hosted by Julie Houghton, your autoimmune coach. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it. For the complete show notes, links, transcripts, and everything discussed today, visit inspiredliving.show. You can also send in your questions there to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Remember, it's time to take your power back.